Hello class. My name is Justin. The Scarlet Letter, Nathaniel Hawthorne's 1850 masterpiece, is America's first psychological novel. Set in Puritan New England in the 1600s, The Scarlet Letter focuses on the effects of sin and guilt through the life of Hester Prynne, who gives birth to a daughter after committing adultery, refuses to identify the father, and works to forge a new life and new identity. Because of the book's symbolic, imaginative, and non-realistic slant, it is usually classified as a romance rather than as a novel. And even though we won't be reading The Scarlet Letter as a class, it is important that you know a little about it. This should help.
The Scarlet Letter is about a woman named Hester Prynne, who lives in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in the 1640s, near the very beginning of the colonial period. She has an adulterous affair and has a baby, and the colony makes her wear a scarlet letter A on her chest for adulteress, and treats her as an outcast. She keeps the baby's father a secret, but his identity comes out at the end of the book. The first chapter is called The Custom House, and it tells the story of how the author was working as the administrator of a custom house in Salem when he found an embroidered letter A and some papers that tell Hester Prynne's story. When he got fired from his job, he found time to write the Scarlet Letter. The first scene of the actual novel has Hester coming out of the jail with a baby in her arms and the Scarlet Letter A embroidered on her chest. The baby is 3 months old. Hester was in jail for adultery, and since no one knows who the baby's father was, we can assume she was discovered and sentenced to jail time when her pregnancy started to show. The first thing Hester has to do is stand on a scaffold where they keep a pillory, which is a device for locking people up in public. They don't lock her into the pillory, but she has to stand on the platform for a long time with everyone staring at her. Eventually, she sees someone at the edge of the crowd. This man is her husband. He had sent her ahead of him to Massachusetts, while he stayed behind in Europe, and when he tried to join her, he encountered various mishaps, and wound up imprisoned by Native Americans, while she was having her affair and being in jail. He wanders out of the forest on exactly the day that she's up in front of the pillory. He doesn't tell anyone who he is, and he puts his finger to his lips so Hester won't reveal his identity. The governor and the eldest clergyman ask the young minister, Reverend Dimsdale, to speak to Hester about her sin. Dimsdale asks Hester to reveal the father of her baby, so he can confess and atone for his crimes with her. We learn soon that Dimsdale himself is the father, but Hester refuses to reveal this secret to anyone. Later, Hester is back in her cell for the end of her stay in jail, and her husband comes to see her, posing as a doctor. He says he forgives her for cheating on him, but he makes her promise not to reveal who he is, and he swears he'll find out who the father is. From that point on, he starts calling himself Roger Chillingworth.
Perhaps we can do this in a more interesting and quicker fashion.
If you can count to 10, you can follow the plot to The Scarlet Letter. Ready? One, Hester Prynne, local adulteress, is temporarily let out of jail for public shaming. 2, the minister is sorrowful. 3, Hester's estranged husband Chillingworth shows up and swears revenge. 4, Pearl, her bastard child, cries. 5, Hester gets out of jail for real. She's an outcast, but she's also an artist. 6, skilled at needlework, Hester eventually earns the town's respect. Still, she wears none of her own handiwork except that glowing red letter A and donates most of her money to the poor. 7, Pearl grows up. There's something strange, almost devilish about that kid, and what's with her connection to the minister? 8, that's what Chillingworth would like to know. He's determined to expose the minister's darkest secrets. 9, too late, the minister and Hester reunite in the forest. They make plans for escape, but heaven and Hester's husband will have none of it. 10, the story ends with death, unrequited love, and a sliver of redemption.
Yes, much better. Would you look at the characters a little more closely, please?
Hester Prynne, adulteress, alienated, artist, able. If it starts with A, Hawthorne's probably given her the characteristic. Hester is the protagonist, and you'll watch as the guilt she harbors over her affair changes her, mostly, if you can believe it, for the better.
Which is the opposite of what the colonist wanted the letter to do. When she sees how tormented Dimsdale is, and realizes that Chillingworth is the reason, she goes to confront Chillingworth. She finds Chillingworth at the beach and tells him he's turned into a fiend. He admits that he's made Dimsdale suffer, but he can't stop himself. Hester says that she's going to tell Dimsdale the truth, and she points out that Chillingworth could forgive and forget everything. Chillingworth says he can't do that.
Roger Chillingworth, estranged husband, hunchback, leech, doctor, devil. Basically, Chillingworth spends the entire novel trying to destroy Dimmesdale and ends up destroying himself. He is the true embodiment of evil in the story.
Chillingworth constantly questions and pries into Dimmesdale's life to try to get Dimmesdale to reveal his secret. Once, Pearl and Hester see them together, and Pearl warns her mother not to get caught by the black man like the minister has. The black man is what the colonists call the devil. One day, Chillingworth goes a little too far and says that Dimmesdale's disease must actually be a spiritual problem or secret. Dimmesdale tells him it's none of his business. He'll confess to God. When Dimmesdale goes to sleep, Chillingworth opens Dimmesdale's shirt and sees something on his chest that tells him everything he needs to know. Now Chillingworth can torture Dimmesdale at will. Even though Dimmesdale has no idea that Chillingworth knows the secret, Chillingworth can make sure he's always reminded of it.
Arthur Dimmesdale, sainted reverend, adulterer. How's that for conflict? Dimmesdale wants nothing more than to confess his sins, but he can't decide which is better, punishing himself in silence or facing the shame that comes with being exposed.
Dimmesdale is consumed by guilt at the fact that he slept with Hester and that no one knows it. He gives the best sermons in the colony because he understands sin so well and can empathize. But the fact that everyone thinks he's so holy makes his guilt worse. He wants to confess to his congregation, and he tells them he's a sinner, but they only like him more. When he's alone, he whips himself and starves himself, and he sees visions of his parents and Pearl and Hester.
Pearl, the living Scarlet Letter. Elf child, outcast. If the Scarlet Letter could speak, which it can't. Hello, metaphor? If the Scarlet Letter could speak, it would say what Pearl says. Pearl basically serves to provoke the adult characters in this story, and to expose the truths that would otherwise remain hidden.
I suppose we need to mention what some of these truths, these themes are. The Scarlet Letter definitely conveys the idea that forgiveness is important. Yes, and that revenge can destroy a person. Also, it shows how people who acknowledge and accept their own imperfections have more empathy when it comes to the imperfections of others. But the theme I find the most compelling in the story is this idea that we must be true to our hearts and ourselves, and not hide this truth from the world. So, you know the story ends with death. I thought you would want to know who, and how. Well, Dimmesdale gives an election day sermon.
The sermon is a huge hit, the biggest sermon ever given in New England. Dimmesdale comes out and takes Hester and Pearl by the hand and leads them up onto the pillory platform with him. Chillingworth tries to stop him, but can't. Dimmesdale says he should have stood with them 7 years before. Then he opens his shirt and reveals the Scarlet Letter on his chest. No one knows how it got there. It could be a sign from God, or he might have scarred himself. It's a mystery. Dimmesdale asks Pearl if she'll kiss him now, and she does. Hester asks if they'll be together in heaven, and he says no. They need to repent for their sin. Then he dies.
Okay, for the record, Hawthorne never says exactly what is on Dimmesdale's chest. He just tells us what most people saw, and I quote, "Most of the spectators testified to having seen, on the breast of the unhappy minister, a scarlet letter the very semblance of that worn by Hester Prynne imprinted in the flesh. Some say he inflicted a hideous torture on himself. Some thought that Chillingworth, the vengeful husband, created the mark with magic and poisonous drugs. Others thought that it was the ever-active tooth of remorse, gnawing from the inmost heart outwardly. And now here's the resolution of the Scarlet Letter.
Chillingworth dies and leaves a huge inheritance to Pearl. Hester and Pearl leave the colony for a while, and Pearl apparently marries someone rich in Europe. But Hester eventually comes back to live in her cottage and wear her Scarlet Letter again. Hester is buried beside Dimmesdale, but not too close beside him, and they share a headstone with an A on it.